Hello and welcome. With social distancing still in effect, it may well be a little while before you can join us here in Harrogate. So for the time being, we would like to share with you just a little bit of the story of what we think makes our splendid spa town so special. Somewhere that's been chosen to be the venue for international sporty events and festivals alike. Somewhere that's consistently voted to be one of the happiest places in the world to live. And a corner of Yorkshire that is certainly one of the most beautiful in the country. So I hope that you'll join us for the story of Harrogate. So just to give us our bearings, if we were to travel 400 miles in that direction, we'll reach John O'Groats at the northeast tip of Scotland. 400 miles that way is Land's End at the southwest tip of Cornwall. 60 miles behind us is the North Sea, and 60 miles ahead of us is the Atlantic Ocean. But it was right here, in the heart of Great Britain, that in 1571, a man called William Slingsby came to Harrogate and discovered naturally occurring waters springing to the ground. Most of us are familiar with the name Slingsby through the juniper-flavoured distilled water produced by the Spirit of Harrogate. And although William Slingsby has nothing to do with the gin itself, he was very much the inspiration, or the one that really got the ball rolling for Harrogate to turn it into the thriving spa town and tourist destination that it is today. By 1596, his good friend and personal doctor to Queen Elizabeth I, Dr. Timothy Bright, had heard word of Slingsby's discoveries of the springs and travelled in here to examine the waters. Upon doing so, he deemed them to have similar properties to that of the town of Spa in Belgium, which he had visited recently, and encouraged his friends and colleagues alike to travel in here and sample the waters, or take the cure as it was becoming known, in the hope of curing all manner of medical ailments and illnesses. Now just here we've got the Stray. This is an amazing 200-acre-long stretch of common land that engulfs Harrogate, and 200 years ago was protected by an Act of Parliament, saying that it must remain open and unenclosed for everyone to use. This was also the home for perhaps one of the most famous of the springs and the most popular of the springs found here in Harrogate, and that was the Stinking Spool. So just as we head past here, I wanted to show you this. This used to be the original home of our local paper, the Harrogate Advertiser, and you might be able to make out on the right-hand wall there where it reads, "List of visitors." Remember that, as we're going to come on to talk about that a little later on. Now we're down in the heart of Georgian Harrogate, and it's no great surprise that the first real buildings of substance to arrive here came in the form of the Crown and the White Hart hotels in the early 1800s. But another great sign of the sustained wealth travelling into this area came in the form of the Montpellier shopping quarter. This was and still is home to lots of independent jewellery shops, antique shops, fashion outlets. The most famous of these has to be Farrah's Toffee Shop. Originally established in 1840, the toffees were designed to have a distinct lemony flavour to take away the horrid taste of the sulphur water the guests were drinking for part of the cure. But since then it's become a favourite of the royal family. And they even have a letter from Her Majesty the Queen thanking them for the beautiful box of Farrah's toffees she received on her birthday, and they're said to be her favourites. I'm sure she doesn't say that to every toffee shop. Harrogate has a greater number of unique naturally occurring springs than anywhere else in the world, and that's due to its amazing geology. Harrogate's believed to be built on top of an ancient volcano, which is around 200 million years old. Since then, during the Triassic period, a new layer of bedrock has formed, made up of sandstone, mudstone and limestone. As the Earth has moved, this bedrock has cracked and folded, creating channels and gullies. Now, the water that comes up here is around 20,000 years old and comes from an ancient sea 5 miles beneath us. As that water comes up, it goes through these channels and gullies and picks up different mineral properties such as iron, manganese, sulfur, and that's what gives every spring its uniqueness. On this site here, we've got 4 of those. 3 sulfur and 1 iron or chalybeate. Now, originally this was just a marshy, boggy area. And in the 1600s, when guests were traveling here to take the cure, they would quite simply ladle up the water off the muddy ground and pour it over themselves or fill up their canteens, but clearly this wasn't ideal. So by 1777, the Harrogate Improvement Commission built 4 wells here, followed in 1842 by the magnificent pump rooms that we see. Their main job was pump the water up from the wells to a counter which would, much like a bar where you could buy a glass of water. Your doctor might prescribe a different spring's waters depending on your ailment. And it was so popular that by 1926, over 250,000 guests per year were travelling in here just to try these waters. Here we've got a fabulous photograph taken in 1911 where you can see the Edwardian gentry arriving to take their morning cup of sulphur water. However, for those that couldn't afford to buy a glass, a free tap was set up outside, which we're going to take a look at now. So it's going to start becoming fairly obvious why it's known as the Stinking Spool. For anyone that's had the chance to visit Harrogate, that's because of the pongy, eggy aroma emitting from the sulphur spring. And the smell that we get there is the sulphur. As the water moves through the sulphur rock, it breaks it down, and bacteria feed on that sulphur, producing enzymes, and the enzymes are what creates that smell. Now, health and safety hat on for a moment. Don't drink sulphur water. Some people have been drinking sulphur water for hundreds of years, and although other than some odd antibacterial properties, it doesn't have any particular medical benefits, in small amounts on the odd occasion, it won't be that harmful. And with its mild antibacterial properties, for external use and mild skin ailments, can be quite favourable. Sulphur in modern clinical trials has also been proven to reduce the heart rate and stress, so it's not all poppycock and snake oil. However, some doctors were prescribing to drink up to 6 pints a day of this stuff, which clearly wasn't good for anyone. However, if you're not used to drinking sulphur water, it can have certain purgative effects that you might not be expecting. Then that was quite useful for Victorians. Around 80% of them suffered from some kind of intestinal parasite, so before modern day medicine, this really was the next best thing. And in small amounts on the odd occasion, it's really not that bad. What we're going to go and do now, though, is check out the great hydrotherapy centres that were starting to emerge as the treatments utilising the sulphur water were becoming more sophisticated. As we head down, though, we're going to go past Hales Bar, which is the oldest pub in Harrogate, dating back to 1766. You'll notice how the left-hand side of the pub is actually sunken down. That's because when it was built, this was still just that marshy, boggy area. And it wasn't until the later construction of the pump rooms in 1842 that they actually raised the foundations of the entire area, and poor Hales Bar sort of got left sunken down where it was. And this is a great time to look at Hales Bar because it was on this month in 1851 that the window tax was finally abolished in the United Kingdom. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the tax itself, but essentially what it stated was if you had up to 9 windows in your home, you had to pay around 2.5 shillings, about £25 in today's money. However, if you had between 10 and 20 windows, you had to pay double that. So you can tell that the owner of Hales Bar was a shrewd Yorkshireman, as he's blocked up those middle 3 windows, leaving exactly 9 remaining, and thus only having to pay the lower rate of tax. It's where we get the phrase daylight robbery originating from. This statue here is rather fascinating. It's one of only 6 ever made of Cupid and Psyche. The first one went to the brother of Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, and we got the second one. So now we're heading down into what was very much the heart of Victorian Harrogate. And just to emphasise how rapidly this area is expanding, I'm going to say lots of dates and numbers and times very quickly, so I hope you write it down for the test at the end. But in 1831, the first attempt at a proper hydrotherapy centre came here in the form of the Victoria Baths, which are sadly no longer with us. But in 1835, the Montpellier Baths opened on this site here, which again are sadly no longer with us. But within just the first 5 years alone, they welcomed over 12,000 visitors through their doors for a whole variety of hydrotherapy treatments. Then by the 1860s came the spa concert rooms, followed in the 1870s by the new Victoria Baths on this site here. Now, these were all wonderful, they really were. But they were nothing compared to the amazing spa resorts that you would find in Belgium and Germany with their world-renowned doctors. So in the 1890s, our first mayor, Richard Ellis, launched a project to build the Royal Baths complex on top of what was the Montpellier Baths. Now, Ellis was also a very shrewd Yorkshireman, didn't want to have to pay for multiple different architects to submit their designs, so he decided to launch a national competition, in which he found a young team from London, and just 5 years later, at the equivalent cost of £150 million in today's money, the Royal Baths opened and were the first of their kind the world had ever seen. They contained all sorts of amazing treatments, from sulphur baths used for treating gout or rich man's disease, mud and peat baths, but perhaps the most curious of all of these seemed to stem from the Victorians' obsession with electricity, and that was Electro Hydrotherapy. Now, at first this was very popular, but they soon found that while combining electricity and water, you do get some rather shocking results. On a more positive note though, they didn't charge too much. But then with the introduction of the NHS in 1948, that allowed for new and more effective treatments to start coming through, and the baths sadly lost their popularity and began to close. They were turned into the Tourist Information Centre, you've got a couple of restaurants in there, even a nightclub. But one original element of the Royal Baths complex still remains, in the form of the Turkish Baths. These were designed in a stunning Moorish style, using beautiful Islamic arches, amazing arabesque painted ceilings. The glazed brickwork in there, if they want to replace one of those bricks in the wall now, costs just under £100 per brick. And the marble floors are done by the very best Italian experts whose methods are so secretive, they'd actually work with screens surrounding them and sleep on the floors so that no prying English eyes could steal their trade secrets. They're one of only 3 remaining in the country, and certainly one of the most luxurious in the world. In 1948, a Welshman by the name of Nye Bevan introduced the National Health Service to Britain, and the following year he came to Harrogate to inspect our facilities. In fact, the Royal Baths complex was used to host NHS treatments right up until the late 60s. We have seen them return in more recent times though, as just a few months ago our Nhs Nightingale Hospital opened up in Harrogate's Convention Centre to look after the victims of the current pandemic that we're facing. I'm delighted to say that it hasn't had to be used at all during this time, but the building that it occupies is quite a special one, and one that's close to my heart. As the Victorians are travelling in for the waters, the massages, the shopping, they were desperate for entertainment. And the Harrogate Council agreed. Having visited the amazing spa towns of Belgium and Germany and France and seen the stunning theatres, or to use their German name, Quasals, they decided that a quasal is exactly what Harrogate needed and launched a project to build this site here. Now, Dr. Black, the gentleman leading this operation, was also a very shrewd Yorkshireman and didn't want to have to pay for multiple different architects to submit their designs, so he decided to launch a national competition, in which he found a man by the name of Frank Maxim, who's generally regarded to be the greatest theatre architect of his day, having previously designed the Royal Palladium and Hippodrome in London, the Buxton Opera House, even Theatre Royal in Newcastle, to name but a few. But this was very much his pride and joy. It contains a domed ceiling that supports its own weight, meaning that no view-blocking pillars are necessary. For the 1,500 seats inside, the building even contains more gold leaf than Buckingham Palace. These are the lengths of extravagance they were looking to go to satisfy the gentry travelling in here. Over its lifetime, the Royal Hall has been home to many well-known faces. In 1916, Emmeline Pankhurst, one of the founders of the suffragette movement, spoke here. In 1919, having returned from the South Pole for a second time, Sir Ernest Shackleton gave a lecture on his Arctic expedition. My personal favourite has to be in 1963, Mr. Bernard Newman spoke here. Only joking. The Beatles, of course. The area that we've come into now is known as the Duchy Housing Estate, named after the Duchy of Lancaster, otherwise known as Her Majesty the Queen. All of the roads up here are named after dukes, apart from 3 that are named after earls, so you get the kind of target demographic they were looking to entice into this area. It was also home as well at the beginning of the 1700s to the Swan Hotel, which by the 1850s became the Harrogate Hydrotherapy Hotel. This was a stunning establishment, over 200 bedrooms, a dining room for over 300 people, which was many more than the hotel had room for, but then it was quite common to invite friends who were staying in the local area to attend your hotel's gala balls or dinners in the evening. We saw a little bit earlier on how the Harrogate Advertiser used to publish that weekly list of visitors for guests to simply check against and see which hotels their friends were staying in. Clearly they didn't have data protection laws back then, but it was very much the Facebook check-in of its day. Now, although the Old Swan was a hotel, you could have been mistaken for thinking it was a hospital. Doctors would make daily rounds in top hats and frock coats and instigate strict control over everything from a guest's diet to their massage timetable and of course their water consumption. Over its lifetime, many well-known residents have stopped by here. Oscar Wilde, Karl Marx, but perhaps most famously in 1926, Agatha Christie. Agatha had a difficult early life. She lost her father when she was very young and then her mother just a few days before a planned Italian holiday with her wartime lover Archie. However, it was then that Archie chose to inform her that he was no longer in love with her and was leaving her for another woman, and this broke Agatha. She jumped into a car and disappeared into the Kent countryside. Planes were used for the first time in human history to help with the missing person search, and over 1,000 officers were called in, but she was nowhere to be seen. Now, the events that day are best known to Agatha, but what we do know is that she arrived here at the Swan, and when she checked in, she couldn't use her own name, of course. She was already a famous novelist by this point. So she decided to use a name which she was pretty sure no one had ever heard of before, and that was the name of her husband's new mistress. She then spent the next 10 days engaging in all the distractions of the spa town before she was eventually recognised. But that doesn't mean to say that crime and mystery have left Harrogate altogether. Every year, our Harrogate International Festivals puts on the world's biggest crime writing festival, sponsored by Theakston's Old Peculiar, right here at the Swan Hotel, welcoming a whole host of big names, as well as putting on all sorts of events throughout the summer. So the area that we're coming into now is known as the Valley Gardens, and what we're walking through was once a 600-metre long glass-covered colonnade that connected the Royal Pump Rooms with the Grand Hotel and the Royal Bath Hospital, providing an extra space for promenading, socialising and being seen here in Harrogate in what was very much becoming the moniker of its day, a space for the rich and famous to come and play. But originally this area was actually known as Boggs Field, and that was a very appropriate name. 36 of those springs emerged just in this area here, bringing up everything from oil, manganese, sulfur, as well as gases from deep beneath us. One visitor to Harrogate in the early 1800s described this as the appearance of a great chemical laboratory of nature. So you can imagine the sight that would have met us looking out over here. How by the 1860s, a local man, David Simpson, thought it'd be a good idea to landscape this area, and the council really liked that suggestion. However, Simpson was also a very shrewd Yorkshireman and didn't want to have to pay for multiple different architects to submit their designs, so he decided to launch a national competition, but this time announcing a £10 prize, which is about £2,000 in today's money. And I would love to spend the next 7 or 8 hours showing you all the amazing features here. Unfortunately, we've only got an hour and a half left today. Only joking, of course, but there is just one building here that I would like to tell you about, and that's the Royal Bath Hospital. In 1836, a public subscription was launched to build the Royal Bath Hospital just behind me here. Essentially, all the local businesses chipped in. Even at the hotels next to the guest book was a donations book where guests staying here could leave something behind. Even Queen Victoria chipped in. And 120 years before the NHS, this was a free hospital. Guests could travel in here from anywhere within the country with a letter from their Lord Mayor or local councillor saying that they weren't able to afford the treatments down at the main hydrotherapy centres, and for free were admitted here. It's one of the things that made me fall in love with this town is the fact that the Stray was protected by that Act of Parliament, to say that it must remain open and unenclosed for everyone to use. Down at the pump rooms in 1836, the owner of the Crown Hotel just next door, Joseph Thackeray, tried tunnelling underneath that cobbled street where we were earlier into the pump rooms in an attempt to divert the waters into his own hotel. Luckily, this was discovered, and subsequently those waters too were protected, so that to this day, no matter what your standing in society or income, those waters are accessible to everyone. Now, don't get me wrong, of course Harrogate was designed for the ultra-wealthy visitors coming in here and spending their money, but I like to think that the council knew where their priorities were. And that was with the hard-working locals that really built this town up from scratch. We've talked a lot about the cure that people are coming here to Harrogate for, but the cure wasn't just drinking those horrid sulphur waters down at the Stinking Spool. It wasn't just getting a massage in the great hydrotherapy centre. It wasn't just strolling through the beautiful valley gardens and getting away from the big, smoky, smoggy cities of industrial Victorian England. I think it was a combination of all of these things, and even if some of it was down to the placebo effect, after 3 or 4 weeks strolling around in this, how could you not feel better? After the recent uncertainty, I'm delighted to see life coming back to Harrogate. Whilst we've been away, the local council and the Friends have been doing a fantastic job of not only looking after the Valley Gardens, but keeping the whole of Harrogate looking spectacular. I hope you can come and join us in the very near future, but until then, be sure to check out the Harrogate International Festival's website for all of the events they've been putting online. Until then though, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day and hopefully see you soon.
Thanks for joining us. If you have enjoyed this event as part of the Harrogate International Festivals, please do think about a donation to ensure that our festivals can survive in the future. Donations can be made by texting HIF and the amount to 70085. For more events, please visit our online hub, the HIF Player. It's packed with upcoming live streams, events you've missed, archive recordings and much more.